welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and our guest today is Christopher Irion. He's a photographer and a community builder, and I think he's probably best known in the area for his photo booth project, which was a brilliant and exciting thing that he did in 2 locations here in the area. So he's going to be talking to us about that, as well as some other projects he has going on. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks, Wendy.
It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's very. We have a few exciting things to talk about, I think, and we will start back when you were growing up outside of Philadelphia, and you lived with your family there and went on to Middlebury. You had kind of an arts background in your family?
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah, my father was a furniture maker. He actually made chairs for the White House under the Kennedy administration, and my mother was a interior designer, started out as a painter and taught elementary school art, among other things. Yeah.
My mother did the same, and therefore I remember nothing about art classes in elementary school.
I think I could probably say the same thing.
And so you went on to Middlebury, which was your introduction to Vermont.
It was. You know, actually at the time I wanted to go to a small co-ed college in New England, and there weren't any. With the exception of Middlebury at that point. I mean, very few. There was Hobart and I can't remember.
Colgate, yeah, there were
Trinity.
a few.
But that was, you know, really before things started changing, and I got to Vermont and just fell in love, although I only stayed at Middlebury for 2 years. Got very interested in painting while I was at Middlebury, and fortunately there were 2 people in the studio faculty that had gone to RISD, and they just said, you need to get out of here. So I did for a couple of years, and then came back to Middlebury after a hiatus of, spent some time in a graphic design firm that I started with a friend of mine, and then cooking for a couple of years. I was primarily working as a photographer and ran a black and white lab in Middlebury, and was getting grants from the Vermont Council on the Arts back when they gave grants to artists. And every time I would get one, I'd get in the car and drive across the country, and I had friends in San Francisco. That was always my end point, and coming back. And I had actually a friend, a classmate that was ahead of me at Middlebury who had moved to San Francisco, became an architect after going to NYU to be a dancer, and he was there, and you know, he said, well, if you want to come out here and, you know, sleep on the floor, if you want to find an apartment, you know, be my guest. And so I kind of packed everything up and said, I'm going to California.
A great time to go, those 70s. You could sleep on any floor in California.
Well, that's true. And I was there, you know, for 30 years. Since I'm really people-oriented at this point. One of my heroes at then and still is Walker Evans, who could photograph anything with dignity, whether it was a human face or a building or a tool or whatever. And I kind of saw myself as working in that milieu, only to find that when I got to California, it was all about surface. I mean, even more than it was everywhere else. And so the social aspects of architecture and the interest in that, probably I'd missed it by 10 years or more. But I was good at it, and I became successful, and it took me a long time to realize that I didn't like things that didn't move. And, you know, I extricated myself at some point, but I worked for most of the major magazines, House and Garden, Architectural Digest, House Beautiful, you know, all those magazines, and it was fun. I did a lot of work for Town and Country magazine, photographing people in, you know, the upper echelons, which was interesting because I grew up with some of those people and I could smell like them, but I wasn't really that interested in doing that. And then I got really interested in going back to shooting people in portraits, and got picked up by a really good an agent who was willing to market that part of me. So I felt that I could kind of slowly ease back into that my artist self, that was, we were together for 19 years.
Wow! And this is the This is
my agent. You know, we're doing primarily advertising work, but I mean, yeah. And that's really what. It was during that period that I really kind of developed my interest in the photo booth. And
yes, well, let's talk about the origins of photo booth, because you talked about going back to the human face as a subject. And after doing all of this, working in advertising and architectural photography, to come back to portraiture, however you defined that at the
Right.
time,
Yeah.
did it feel like sort of a homecoming to you?
Yeah, in a lot of ways it did. Yeah, in some very big ways it did. I mean, I was using my, in my personal work, I was continuing to pursue portraiture, and I had this whole rig that I put on a cart with a battery and a big umbrella, and I could do all these things where, to walk up to people on the street. I was always seeing incredible faces. San Francisco has this just amazing cross-section of people that it draws to the city. And, but the problem was you set all this stuff up and everybody's looking at you and people are self-conscious and you can get, so I was, I had a camera that was attached to my head with Velcro to a neoprene helmet with a little thing that I had in my pocket that I would squeeze. And, but I basically made a complete fool out of myself. And, there were a lot of technical problems with that, but I mean,
You had an aim, though.
I had an aim. So I tried all kinds of things, and then I just thought, well, if I can just give people a private space in a public place, then I can invite people in, and and yet I still have this flow of traffic. I can set up somewhere and invite people, and that was really how the photo booth started. I didn't think of it as an aspect of social practice or community at that point. But there was a cafe in my neighborhood that I went to that had a very sort of community-oriented proprietor, and I said, I'd love to set up out here and do portraits of people who come in and out of the cafe. I ended up, 4 days over 3 months, I think, ended up with 500 and some odd portraits, and then had to figure out how I was going to put them all together, because I would walk in there for coffee realizing that I wasn't going to be able to explain all these people who knew me, because I was in there every day, why I left them out. So, and that was really that was the beginning of the rise of digital photography, at least in the commercial realm. And so that allowed me to get a digital printer, print these things in 8-foot-long strips, 2 feet wide, and we literally wallpapered the walls of the cafe.
Yes.
With this.
I think we should back up for a second. We're going to be doing some cutaways, which will show people a little bit more. People who haven't seen your photo booth exhibits. But these are not photographs. These are not little photographs. These are great big photographs.
Yeah.
What's the dimension?
Well, each image is 16 by 24 inches, which is big for most people, even though it's on a big installation wall that's typically 10 feet high by 72 feet long. But when you get up close, actually most of the images are slightly larger than life size. And that gives them kind of you wouldn't think necessarily that it does, but it gives them an amazing sort of power.
Yes.
The sense of looking at them at that scale.
Yes.
So yeah, they're large, and the installations tend to be large.
Yeah. I want to stay with that just for a minute, because again, for people who haven't seen the displays, when you talk about the power of these, yes, the fact that they are a little bit bigger than life size. And for instance, in the Putney Co-op, you walk in and you see them around the perimeter of the big room there, and you recognize these people, and you see them in such a free and open state, that you have. For me anyway, and I think it's true of most people, it's really you're a little bit awestruck, I think, by their presence. I mean, there's such a strong sense of presence in each one of these.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that. I'm curious about how you're able to do that.
I thought I was just building a portrait studio.
Right.
And interesting enough, when I started this first project and ended up with all of these, and then completely covering the walls to the point where I was a little bit terrified to go in the next morning after we'd done spent all night putting these things up.
This is San Francisco.
In San Francisco, that people are going to think, who is this guy who feels like he has to put, every inch in front of us?
Yeah.
And I walked in and it was a March day. It was beautiful, sunny Sunday morning, and kids were out on their bikes, and people were out on the sidewalk, and the place was packed, and the front doors are always open, so you just walk up the steps, and I walked in, and somebody saw me and started to clap, and by the time I got to the counter, I had a standing ovation. So, and this,
There's an endorsement.
I was now making images that were what I'd been trying to make for years, for 30 years maybe. And this was sort of the fruition, even though I didn't know this is where I was going to end up. It wasn't just that, if a room full of beautiful photographs wouldn't have gotten that response. I think what it was is that they realized that it was their community reflected back to itself.
Right.
And that's when the light bulb went on for me to see that my path was not to be making random portraits on the street and making a collection of interesting portraits, but that in fact, the idea of photographing communities in ways that allowed them to be reflected back to themselves or to be able to gather there. And that's, when you talk about the power of the photo booth, what I think is kind of interesting about it is that you're in a little room, a little white room. I'm on the outside with a camera that goes through a hole, and there's a little thing that goes up and down, so if I've got a little kid, I can be eye level here, or a tall person. And, people don't know what to expect. They don't know whether 3 little pictures are going to come out of a slot after they walk out. I mean, they don't know what it is. The less they know, the better. So they're kind of open to the moment. They're spontaneous. They're in this room where there's no visual cues. Everything that was there 2 minutes ago when they were outside is gone. And so what I'd see is that people, it's often really our best selves in the sense that we're present, we are open to the moment, we're alive, we don't know what's happening. And because they can't see the camera, they can't see my camera finger, that public mask drops away. And so what you end up with in one of these installations is, for the most part, almost everybody looking as if with a kind of a gaze that they only share with their most intimate partners, family, friends. And so, because in fact, I would see people in line getting coffee, and I'd just been looking at them on a monitor that's like this big, and I'd have to is that person? Because, they got their public mask on, I don't even recognize them.
So interesting.
So, the fact that I kind of see that when I do one of these projects and present it to a community, that everybody, I think the reason why people respond to it the way they do is because they're seeing kind of their best selves, and everybody is in a very, it's very democratic, it's kind of it's very flattering light, and they're disarmed. And that to me is certainly what what got me fired up, and I think I ended up doing in the last 14, 15 years, 27 projects maybe around the country. So
really, with the photo booth.
With the photo booth, yeah.
Yeah. And what kind of feedback do you get from people who either were part of it or who view it?
Well, the feedback is, it's pretty wonderful. I mean, the hard part is that basically I come in, do the installation, and I leave.
Yeah.
So I have a little Google alert that anytime photo booth and Christopher Irion show up anywhere on the internet, I get this little thing that says, and then it's somebody's blog or it's a local newspaper article. So that's really most of the way, unless it's a community that I know, like Putney, when I did the Putney one, or my neighborhood in San Francisco or Brattleboro. That most of the cases I'm not there to get those responses. So it's, but people said, I've been in tears, most beautiful portrait of me I've ever had. I mean, very flattering things. It definitely, and I think that, people have a kind of renewed sense of how they're connected to the community. And that, that kind of community and how we connect has really been the through thread for me and all of the things that have actually come out of the photo booth. And I think as I now consider myself an artist with a social practice, and that social practice includes things like the local Harvest Lantern Supper that we do every year, every September in Putney for the community. I have a wood-fired pizza oven and kind of regularly have these big 25 people dinners where I try to invite interesting people who would like to sit down and talk. And, in an age when we don't have, the church social or the Harvest Festival or any of these other things where we get together on a regular basis. So I think providing a space where people can actually sit down and talk and have it be an interesting kind of dynamic group of people is kind of, I mean, and now really my interest in, through my interest in the photo booth, seeing that I really actually wanted to know more what these stories actually were, rather than feeling like I could make up a story. And so that really has led me to do films about people in my community and finding ways of showing that back. Because I want, it's amazing, somebody says, oh, you know them, they did this, this, and this, and you go down this list and you go, oh my God, that's like, that person's in our community, I never knew that about them,
That's right, that's right, and I love it, because that's sort of the idea I had behind this show as well. It's like connecting, people to each other in a broadcast kind of way. You've kind of put all your cards on the table of all the various things you've done, which is great, because it also shows this organic route that you've taken through the course of your life, really. When you are doing the photo booth, what's it like for you? You're getting one person after another coming in. You're seeing them, you're capturing them in some way. You're capturing a part of them. What's it like for you?
It's an incredible experience, because basically I've got people working on the outside to get them to sign the releases and get in and out, and I'm really not chatting them up at all. I'm there with the camera and almost completely, I'll stand up between takes, but I'm right back down, and a lot of what I'm concerned with is technical stuff at that point. Is it in focus? What's the composition? Do I use a zoom lens? Do I move in close? Horizontal, vertical? Where do I put them in the frame?
Yeah.
At the same time as I'm looking for, the one thing that I get to do is really choose the moments when I trip the shutter, and I'm really looking for that kind of a revealing moment, not something that I think of as being emblematic in the way that they would choose this one to give to their mother or something like that, but one where there's a complexity of emotion that's going across the face, there's a freshness, there's a sense of aliveness, and so I'm looking for that, and I'm, just as fast as I can. I would say it's between 10 and 30 seconds that people are in front of me, so I am really going fast.
Yeah.
The really incredible time is when I'm looking at them on a monitor like this, and I'm looking at every detail. Yeah. And there's, sometimes there's almost like a sense of trespass, that they have no idea that it's just, you're looking at pores, you're looking at eyelashes, eyebrows, whatever it is. It's that kind of privileged gaze that they've given me permission to take their picture, but there's and you're seeing people in their vulnerability, they're open, and that's really powerful to be. Sometimes I've been almost in tears in front of the monitor when I'm looking at somebody where I feel like their soul is open to the camera.
Right.
And so that's really, for me, more where the deepest, most heartfelt kind of connective experience is. Because the photo booth itself it's a rush, and it's a technical challenge.
Yes.
And you're also, sometimes, they can hear me, so sometimes I'm giving them a few prompts, but I'm not really saying do this and do that, or look at me, or think of this, or anything like that.
You're not having a conversation either.
No.
And also I know that you mentioned at some point that growing up you were kind of shy.
Oh, God, I was incredibly shy when I was a kid.
And I think a lot of photographers I talked to have said the same thing, about being shy.
Yeah, the photo booth really changed me. It was, because even though I had assistants, I was always keeping my eye open. If we were on a street, particularly in a city where there was a lot of traffic or something like that, I'm always looking for that interesting face. And, so I had to jump right up and go, hey, and I had like 3.5 seconds to get over this initial, whoa, who are you, get out of my space.
This is like San Francisco in an
or even
area.
even outside the co-op in Putney. It's still that same. It's a little bit different, but yeah, it's still that same thing of how do you connect with somebody quickly enough to kind of disarm them in a way that you can then ask them for something.
Yeah.
And you have to, it's like this radar that you end up developing. It's sort of like, when do they need to be asked more than once in order to feel like you really want them? You're not being perfunctory. And then when are you asking me too many times that they've already said no and you're really starting to bug them?
Yeah.
And so, you pick up this sensitivity that I never had. I took a course in improv because I just wanted to like loosen up. And that was the same kind of thing where you kind of like, okay, here's the story,
Yeah.
and then you start on this thing and
Yeah.
you start to realize that you have this ability to kind of like, there's an energy that you can work with.
And you stay with it. I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of it too.
Right.
You just keep moving.
Yeah, so I actually think taking one improv course was a precursor to the photo booth, and that's, but yeah, the photo booth really kind of broke me open in a lot of ways.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
And made me feel like, not only that, but I kind of I realized that I had this sense of, at 30 paces, I was deciding whether I liked that person, I didn't like them, I was comfortable, I wasn't comfortable, and that went away. I mean, for a guy, it's a lot easier. I think for women, always have that kind of sensitivity, understandably, but that when I realized, it's like, oh, I'm just seeing that person just as they are, not bringing some kind of judgment about them based on, any number of things that we could use to pass judgment.
Yes. Photo booth project, I think the one that we had in Putney and the one that was at the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center were bringing the community together. That was, I know that was one of your goals, but it was also a reality in having everybody's photo right next to each other. The installation itself created a community.
I've never really seen the photo booth project as artwork. I really see is that the more effective it is as an active community, or the less it's perceived as art, the more effective it is as an active community. And that's why the museum projects in particular have never been on the inside of a museum, because I realized very early on that there were some people who, if you were opening the doors to anybody in the community, are not going to feel entitled to cross that threshold. And then the rise of this art movement called social practice, which really has been just in the last 10 years. And Erin O'Keefe with the Tiny House Project and the Human Connection Project, which is what she calls her whole kind of orientation towards whatever she's looking at, and somebody like Katie Bachler, who has the Avenue Grocery, that really there's a kind of artistic intent behind that kind of making, in Katie's case, this kind of nexus of the community, and it's kind of, you're not really saying, this is a work of art, but she's making it so in that way. So that that I could see that whether it was people sitting down at a table and having a conversation, whether it was creating events in the community that people could do that, whether it was building pizza ovens for other members of the community, other schools, that anything that really ask the question, how do we connect?
Yes.
Especially in this, this time of disconnection, of anxiety, of people being stuck in their screens. I think I've really come to see that, at some point, if the cow dung hits the fan, we really need to know who our neighbors are, and we need to be able to think, geez, I've seen them in the last year. I've seen them 6 months ago. I can walk across the street and say, hey, my power's out, do you have any gasoline?
Right.
That kind of thing, because we're losing that connection. And I find that really troubling and also very motivating to find lots of different ways outside of, with what started with the photo booth and kind of awoken me to this kind of really consciousness about community and how we connect, and then bringing that out into many different ways.
Right, you're obviously doing this through the photos, but also food and housing, are part of how you do this. With the, you're doing the local harvest supper at the Putney Central School, which has become an annual event in September, I believe, right?
Eighth or ninth year, I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time, of bringing the whole community together in one place for a meal. And as you say, sitting down next to each other is a different experience than standing around and having drinks at small tables.
Right, and I have to say that's that's in partnership with the Putney Co-op, who used to have a dinner in September, and then it got too big, and I said, well, why don't we combine forces?
Yeah.
And I have this idea
Yeah.
about lanterns and bringing a kind of a wider group of people
Yes,
than normally comes
that's
to the
right.
community suppers.
Also, that there's a place for everyone in
Absolutely,
these. Yes.
yeah.
And that's why the photo booth is so great, because it is so democratic, and also the lantern suppers. As you say, and as you experience, it's all about connection. And so once you get to know people, you having that interest in bringing people together, you welcome people in. And when you welcome people in, they feel connected, and they feel that they are part of something bigger, which is a huge thing.
Yeah,
And it's
it is huge.
really that sense of
Yeah.
belonging, I think, in one way or another, is what we're all looking for when it comes right down to it.
Yeah.
Do you have any new projects coming up?
Well, I've got a number of film projects that I'm continuing to work on, which are kind of in the pipeline and would be kind of boring to just
To list them, yeah.
try to list them. I think probably one of the things that engages me, really on a daily basis is this kind of like, how do we connect? And whether it's this or that, and, how do I pose that question to other people so that it's sort of like, how do you leave a pizza dinner and go, how do I, where do I step up? Whether it's, whether it's having one other, not everybody socializes in once large groups, but, it's sort of like, where do I take responsibility for furthering connection in my community? And that's, I think, really the question that I want to ask everybody else, is that, you're doing it, how are you doing it? How are you doing it? How do we all kind of say, this is a positive value that needs to be cherished and preserved?
Yeah.
And where do I step in?
Where do you
with
step
that?
in? And where's your
Yeah.
place? I think that's another thing.
Yeah.
As far as belonging goes, people want to find where their place is. I also want to mention to folks that Christopher has a wonderful website, so you can check out Christopher Irion. I think it's Christopher. We'll have it at the end of the show, the info for that. But there are lots of some of his interesting projects are up on that. And so thank you for coming on. It was wonderful to have you.
Thanks, Wendy. It was
And
really great.
It's
an honor.
We could talk a lot longer, but we'll have you on again.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
thanks.
you. Thanks to all of you for joining us today with all of these great ideas and new ways of looking at our community. We'll see you next week.